Welcome, and thank you for joining Alternatives to Wet C&D and Vehicle Decon Lessons Learned. Before we begin, please ensure that you have opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I will turn the conference over to Liz Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone, and greetings. I'd also like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Liz Fernandez, and I work with the Professional Development Services Branch. And I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. Dr. Ruman has been an emergency coordinator for District 2 for 11 years, currently assigned duties in Illinois and Wisconsin. She participated in the HPAI response in Wisconsin, acting as a site manager, and helped to develop training for subsequent site managers. In the VND response, she served as a site manager and training coordinator. Our second speaker is Karen Luna, who joined USDA APHIS Vet Services in June of 2015 as an animal health technician based out of Miami, Florida. She obtained her BS in Environmental Studies from Florida International University with minors in biology, chemistry, nutrition, and certificates in agroecology and biodiversity conservation and management. Apart from her normal duties in District 1 field operation, she worked as cleaning and disinfection technician on the ground for HPAI in 2015 and has since joined a national incident management team as the EMRS specialist. She has deployed to HPAI in 2015, several times to New World Screwworm in 2016, Texas cattle fever tick in 2017, and continuously to California for the VND in 2018. And with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Ruman.
All right, thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Karen and I were asked to create a webinar based on this topic and alternatives to wet C&D and vehicle decon lessons learned. Neither one of us pretend to be an expert in this, and everybody has their own knowledge base. So we may say some things that are maybe not your experience, but you're all welcome to make any comments at the end of this presentation. We're going to do just a very brief review on decontamination being a multi-step process, which includes many stages: dry cleaning, wet cleaning, disinfection, and final rinsing. Dry cleaning, of course, is a removal of the dry matter, if at all possible, and options selected and implemented must be included in part of the approved cleaning and disinfection plan. And following these steps provides a general guidance for dry cleaning. And we've got right here, this is out of the C&D handbook, and I'm not going to read through this. You have this information if you have the handbook. But I know when I was site manager, things change. You have to stay on top of them. And when you look at some of the wording in here, too, our goals are to minimize remaining organic matter. It doesn't mean we're going to be 100%. And especially number 4, too, it's priority to ensure that all wet organic matter is dry or removed. We all know desiccation can be our friend when it comes to viruses and bacteria. So there are standards for how much organic material should be present on any given surface, but there again, the final outcome and the final okay goes back to the incident commander in that team. When I was on site manager at an establishment, a large commercial establishment in California, in the end, they did not do any cleaning at all. They did a fallow period. So every situation is unique based on the temperature outside, who you're working with, and what the organism is. So your basic dry cleaning is the removal of gross contamination, manure, soil, bedding, and feed. When I was in a site manager in Wisconsin, a lot of dust can be created, so being able to moisten this can certainly help, not only people working there, but this pathogen spread as well. Air blowers should not be used. Scraping, sweeping, vacuuming, and manual methods. The team that was on the farm I was at had a very large vacuum, and it was pretty cool to see that work, how they picked up a lot of the dry matter once they accumulated it. And then you have wet cleaning. Of course, it further removes the debris and dirt until surfaces are visibly clean. Generally, wet cleaning does involve some type of soapy water and or detergents added. Wet cleaning can be a soaking, a pressure washing, or a scrubbing. We all have different types of mechanisms we might go through to do that, and all of these should be cleared before they're done in the wet cleaning step. Disinfection is the treatment with disinfectants. Could be done with spraying, foaming, or fogging. There's also several factors affecting the adequate disinfection. Temperature, and that means the ambient temperature. How cold or how hot is it outside? Is it going to dry? Is there a lot of humidity? The concentration of the disinfectant you're using, has it been properly mixed? Has it been sitting around for a long time? The contact time, how long does it take it to be effective? Different studies have been done, which we're going to talk a little bit about later, contact time and how it's affected by the ambient temperature. And disinfection, we know from previous studies and our own experiences, presence of organic matter can really affect the disinfectant used and how effective it is, whether it does a job at all. During HPAI, we had 87% of the commercial premises had used wet disinfection as compared to the other methodologies listed here. It doesn't mean some of these others were combined, but in 87%, the wet disinfection was what was used. So now I'm going to present on a few of the different articles that we came across when we were researching this topic to try to find something new to give to you. The use of compressed air foam in cleaning, and it was presented at the 5th Annual Symposium on Managing Animal Mortalities. Originally, this foam was developed to try to see if we could depopulate poultry in cages. So the foam was experimented with for depop, but it found it had a high value in cleaning and disinfection. So they also added then to try the cleaning experimentation with this foaming, chlorinated or alkaline foaming cleaner. Contact time with this foam helped loosen the organic matter. And we all know how hard those cages are to get clean. So having this contact time with the foam, it really helped when they were able to pressure wash these cages then because of the contact time to loosen that organic debris in the cages. And any of these that I present on, I do have a note here of where you might be able to find the article, and if you cannot find it, you're certainly welcome to contact me. All right, now we're going to review a paper that was published in 2011. It was a study done at 4 locations in Canada. The temperatures were between 28 and 51 degrees Fahrenheit, so that is not super cold, but it did give us some idea of what colder temperatures, how it affected the cleaning and disinfection process. A study evaluated the effectiveness of multi-step process of our decontamination, that is, including dry cleaning, wet cleaning, disinfection, and final rinse. And they used spores and virus particles that were representative of anthrax and FMD. They inoculated stainless steel discs, and the process included a dry cleaning, wet cleaning, disinfection, and rinsing in various combinations to show which was the most effective. With this study, both with the spores and the virus, a greater reduction in contamination was found with complete soil removal. Slight differences between the use of hot and cold water, the cleaning step, and then wet cleaning significantly reduced the spores and viruses. Also in this study of these plates, these stainless steel plates that were put on the vehicles, they did see that undercarriages were the most problematic to get cleaned. The contact time for the disinfectants should be increased during cold weather conditions. They did have one vehicle that they stored indoors at 68 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour prior to disinfection, and they found they had a much larger spore reduction on that vehicle when it was cleaned with the same methodology as the vehicles that were brought in at just the colder temperatures. So what I took away from looking at this study was that the cleaning and the disinfection were actually done in 2 different locations. In the two premises I was on, C and D, cleaning and disinfection of the vehicles, was done in one location. Well, what happens when you have that in one location? The cleaning portion of it, you have an awful lot of water produced in the cleaning step. And Karen's going to touch on this later, that containment or collection of those wastewaters could be very important to local jurisdictions. They don't just want it running everywhere, getting into the groundwater. But if you look at splitting up the cleaning and the disinfection step, there are plenty of cleaners that are biodegradable. So these might be something that your local EPA or whoever the jurisdiction is in the area is okay with. So therefore, looking at the collection of effluent could really be reduced by splitting these two steps up. All right, here is an example of a wash tunnel developed Lori Miller and the DHS with DHS funding. It's a portable cleaning system, and I want to show a couple of unique features about this cleaning system. Here is that it scans the vehicle. So the contours of the vehicle are what is utilized to get a really good cleaning of the vehicle with these arms that come out and go across the vehicle. There are also spray arms that raise lower to clean the undercarriage, and these nozzles oscillate for more effective cleaning and better coverage of the undercarriage and the tire treads. While I was researching some of the cleaning and disinfection that we've done and what has been worked on, I spoke to Bruce Akers from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture in conjunction with ICA, a group out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and they developed this mobile unit. It has an onboard heater, 300 and a 35-gallon tanks, so it can be used both for cleaning and disinfection. And it's very adaptable. It allows for direct hose connection and undercarriage attachment connection. Very easily pulled around, a very self-contained unit. And this was really neat how they developed this unit, and a fairly economical cost, but all in one very mobile, adaptable unit. And now I'm going to touch on some of the cold weather disinfection, a study that was done in 2013, and it was the addition of 10, 20, 30, and 40% of your typical antifreeze, the propylene glycol, to 3 disinfectants, bleach, SDF, and Decon. Results indicated that all 3 disinfectants had no change in effectiveness based on the addition of antifreeze. Results also supported other studies showing increased contact time to get greater log reductions in sub-freezing temperatures. They did also test some of these solutions at various freezing temperatures, and if they did eventually freeze. And they did find that the 10% addition of propylene glycol, you could still get some freezing. So above that, you had to get to pretty cold temperatures to get to a freezing of these substances. Use of chlorine dioxide, another paper, chlorine dioxide and heat treatment. This was done in barns in Iowa. The study was done by Sabre and the EPA in 2016. Barns were used were 50 by 600 egg-laying facilities, 5 cages high with a manure pit in the attic region. Barns were not totally free of organic matter, but had been cleaned. A spore former and a viral surrogate were used on various substrates. They used substrates, they used wood, they used stainless steel, so they put them on several different substrates to do this experiment with the chlorine dioxide and the heat treatment. The chlorine dioxide is a fumigation with an encapsulated barn, so it was a matter of encapsulating these barns and sealing these seams as best they could when they went down the length of this barn. They employed a chlorine dioxide generator that was plugged in to fumigate the barn as well. The good thing about it is that this is a one-day treatment. The goal for this study was 5 hours at 5,000 ppm with a total load of 25,000 ppm. They did find out that because of the organic matter in the barn, they did need to add more than they thought they would need of the chlorine dioxide to get to 25,000 total load. A log reduction was observed on all surfaces for the spores and the virus surrogate. It did cause a bleaching on the wood surfaces. The downside was it found to be harmful to certain metal surfaces as well as some electronics. So looking at whatever you might be trying to decontaminate, chlorine dioxide may or may not be a valuable tool because of these downsides. Also, the heat treatment that was done in the study was for 7 days, 100 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It was pumped into the barn, similar to the chlorine dioxide. No significant reduction in spores or virus surrogates were achieved. Looking at this, you might think, well, why was the heat treatment not effective when we found the heat treatment to be effective during the 2015 outbreak? And there again, they're using a virus surrogate and a spore former, not identical in any way, shape, or form to HPAI, but so they did not find any reduction in spores or virus surrogates with this type of heat treatment. So I'm just presenting the paper. It doesn't mean it wasn't effective in other usages, but just to try to give you an idea of the variation ways we have tried to come up with new ways to decontaminate a building and vehicles, as well as all of those little pieces of equipment that are inside the barns. So with that, Karen Luna has also done some review of some papers, and she's going to present on this, heat treatment.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to chat a little bit more about the heat disinfection treatment because some of us may remember we were part of HPAI in 2015, 2016. We did use that as a method of disinfection. So heat treatment is not a new approach, but it has reemerged as a tested and cost-effective option. We do remember there being quite a few sites that were affected by this virus back in 2015 and 2016. So for some of them, it did work. And this procedure involved whole house heating, balancing time and temperature, and considering the environmental factors that would impact the elimination of that virus. Where it is feasible is the only place that it will be accepted as a method of disinfection and virus elimination. So again, this may not be the right solution to each and every site that you will deal with, but this is something that's going to come from the incident commander at the minimum as far as the decision is made. We do want to encourage that dry cleaning is done before disinfection when it comes to heat treatment, and it may not be ideal, but it is always strongly encouraged and recommended. So one of the basic rules for heat disinfection treatment back in HPAI was that the barns or houses had to be heated between 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 120 for a total of 7 days. And if you can see to the right, day 1 through day 7, we had beginning 100 degrees Fahrenheit and it ended at 115. At least 3 of those days have to be consecutively heated to this temperature range. So this is a successful heat treatment. And we have another example of a successful heat treatment. This particular house didn't have a total of 3 consecutive ones until after the 3rd day. And so that means that their treatment ended up being 9 days, but it still ended up being successful because it met the requirements of a 7-day total requirement and 3 consecutive days. However, if a premises does try to do this heat treatment and they cannot seem to get the temperatures to that desired range, that means that they're going to have to consider an alternative means of disinfection in regards to discussing that with their state or APHIS officials so they can actually, get to their goal of being able to successfully disinfect their prem and be able to move on with restocking. In order to be able to record these temperatures, we have to be able to position the sensors accordingly. They have to be at least 3 thermometers in each barn or each structure, and that's, of course, a minimum. Larger facilities are going to have to place more of them. They do have to be at least 4 to 6 feet apart, and they're going to have to be placed away from the heating devices because you don't want them to be contaminated per se by the closeness, the proximity of these heating devices to taint the temperatures being recorded. You have to document the temperatures every day, and it has to be done at least 2 to 4 times per day for the 7-day period. I remember in HPAI, the incident command would provide certain logs to these people so that they could record it themselves. And after this was completed, those pictures would either be turned into the case and site manager, and they would then give that back to the ICP, and that would be recorded within our emergency management response system only after this treatment was completed. This seems to be a little bit of a controversial kind of a procedure just because producers did end up self-reporting these temperatures. So this is something that we're going to talk about coming up in a little bit in regards to something that maybe we can look upon further in maybe having a better form of procedure in which we don't have to rely on the producers doing this themselves. And so now we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about some of the disinfection methods for surfaces and transporting vehicles, because as we can remember in many of our incidents, we always have to take into consideration what the transportation in and out of the dirty premises or infected premises is involved like. So we have to make sure that we are not transmitting any sort of organism or any sort of virus piece that can infect other premises throughout the process. And we're specifically going to be talking about swine for the most part. So the first case study is a paper titled An Evaluation of Thermo-Assisted Drying and Decontamination for the Elimination of Porcine Reproductive and Respiratory Syndrome Virus from Contaminated Livestock Transport Vehicles. Again, like Dr. Ruman said, if anybody needs any links to these articles, I do have them, so feel free to contact me. So this study was a 4-day study of we're going to call it TAD, the Thermo-Assisted Drying and Decontamination. It's a 4-day study of the TAD-treated scale models of the weaned pig trailers, and they basically were able to make a scale version to model real-life pig trailers. So it's aluminum, single deck, and it held a pig density of 0.07 meters squared per pig. So what they measured was the presence or the absence of the virus and the virus's DNA, and the 4 treatment groups that they included were air drying, washing, overnight drying, and then heat treatment at certain time intervals. So they heated it for about 30 minutes, and they recorded the presence or absence of the virus within each of those intervals. And they also considered overnight drying as a treatment group. So the minimum temperature that they used was 71 degrees Celsius, and that did range from beginning 68.3 degrees to 81.7. The mean was about 73.2 degrees. And the efficacy in results was basically equal to 8 hours overnight drying in a shorter period of time under the study conditions. But in this figure, you can see how, and they're not going to include the overnight drying because that's not a 30-minute procedure, so that's going to be done off-site. But if you look at the y-axis, that is the measure of the virus. And on the x-axis, it's the intervals of time in which they collected the positive swabs. So the positive swab at 0 minutes for all heat, air, and wash groups was at 10, level 10, so they were all still positive. At 10 minutes, you can see that the heat had decreased it down to 7 positive swabs, while air and wash were still at 9 and 10 respectively. By 20 minutes, the heat had already inactivated the virus on all the swabs. So you can't see any of the heat column on any of the swabs there, but you can see that there is still air and wash positive results. It hadn't inactivated it yet, and it stayed the same at 30 minutes. So again, we can say that heat actually did inactivate it in the scale model of this study within 30 minutes, and you can compare that the same as it would to overnight drying. The next paper, titled Evaluation of an Accelerated Hydrogen Peroxide Disinfectant to Inactivate Porcine Epidemic Diarrhea Virus in Swine Feces on Aluminum Surfaces Under Freezing Conditions. This one tested the efficacy of the AHP disinfectant for inactivating the PEDV virus in swine feces on metal surfaces under freezing conditions. And this study had 8 treatment groups, of which it had 2 concentrations of AHP, 1 to 16 and 1 to 32 in a 10% antifreeze solution. It did survey 2 contact times, so the groups were under 40 minutes or under 60 minutes in a negative 10 degrees Celsius freezer. They used 2 levels of the fecal contamination, and of course they did have a positive and negative control group. All the treatment groups ended up being negative for the PEDV virus via the reverse transcriptase PCR. And under the conditions of the study, it was discovered that the 116 and 132 AHP concentrations did in fact inactivate the virus in the swine species at the given contact time. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to verbally underline the contact time phrase, because as we spoke about, contact time really is important in terms of not only what dilutions of disinfectant you use, but the efficacy of what the long-term result is. And here at this table, we can see how they laid out their groups. And so both the control groups are up top, and following throughout on the bottom, all the 40-minute contact groups, so all 5 of them were in there. And they were actually all at 132 and 116, so you can compare both dilutions and see the efficacy at the contact times. But they all ended up being efficient at inactivating the PEDV. So this is kind of just a picture to show you of what the trailer probably looked like or what they're trying to scale. And you can see the propylene glycol up top, which is the antifreeze, and then the AHP on the bottom. This particular study actually ended up using coupons. They didn't use a scale model, but they were able to inoculate that virus on those coupons, and then from there on they moved on to study the results of the disinfectant. The third case study is actually done by the same lead author, so they use the same style of study in regards to using a coupon that was made of aluminum diamond plate, and instead of using a smooth surface, they were able to make it a little bit more complex to resemble what a livestock trailer would actually have within it. And this one is titled Evaluation of a Peroxygen-Based Disinfectant for Inactivation of Porcine Epidemic Virus at Low Temperatures on Metal Surfaces. So this one was a bioassay determining the infectivity of the PEDV on the aluminum livestock trailers after the treatment with the peroxygen-based disinfectant. And like I said, they used the aluminum diamond plate coupons, and they were able to collect the feces and disinfectant remainders on these coupons and administer them to the pigs intragastrically. So they used a saline solution to collect the samples of each coupon as they had been disinfected, and they used a small tube to connect it to each pig's stomach and be able to see if that was going to either infect the pig or if it had already been thoroughly disinfected. So from a collection of a 7-day standpoint, rectal swabs were collected from the pigs on days 3 and 7, and they were then PCR tested for PEDV, and they also used negative and positive control groups, which ended up resulting as they were hypothesized. And in conclusion, under the conditions of this study, the 1 to 100 and 1 to 600 dilutions of this disinfectant did effectively inactivate PEDV with a 30-minute contact time, and it was primarily effective at the 4 degrees Celsius temperature. So I included this figure from that paper to kind of show you how the process was. On day 0, the coupons were contaminated with the feces. They were treated, and then they were finally able to collect it once they combined it with some sterile saline solution, and that's what they fed to the pigs. Later on days 3 and 7, like we said, they were able to collect rectal swabs, and then they were tested for the presence of the FADD. When they finished, the pigs were euthanized and necropsied. And here we have a study done on chemical disinfection on non-porous surfaces. So it pretty much focuses on African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, et cetera, and it's going to study how disinfectants work on plastic and on steel. And if you look at this table, you're actually able to see what concentration, parts per million of sodium hypochlorite, and what percentage of citric acid were effective by log reduction in inactivating the viruses that were presented. So if we look at the African swine fever virus, from the left side, you can see that at 500 ppm hypochlorite, which is your typical bleach solution, you can actually disinfect thoroughly both steel and plastic surfaces. If you look to the right, it shows that the 1% citric acid solution was able to disinfect steel and plastic, but on the plastic end, it did show that you would require a 2% solution to be able to return undetectable virus samples. So it shows how the contact time and the dilution of the disinfectant is important, because the contact time for all this is 10 minutes. The next study focuses on inactivating African swine fever and foot and mouth disease, but on birch wood with the same disinfectants, either sodium hypochlorite, bleach, or citric acid. And for the African swine fever, it ended up being that the 2% citric acid inactivated it within 30 minutes of the contact time. But then for the sodium hypochlorite, it didn't seem that the 1,000 parts per million disinfectant solution was effective enough. So it's recommended that if bleach is used for a wood surface, it has to be at least 2,000 parts per million. So it just goes to show you, different surfaces require different treatments, different contact times must be considered, and all this is done in conjunction with the help of your team or the help of the jurisdiction or the help of just everyone that's working on this needs to be able to successfully and fully stick to the procedure that's going to be done after knowing which one is appropriate for the site that they're testing at. So that's why I want to reiterate the factors that affect virus elimination. And these may or may not be relevant to you right now, but sometimes when we are deployed to an incident outbreak, there are factors that are not the same as from home that you have to take into account. So we've got relative humidity, we've got weather, we've got what type of surface material like we spoke about. There's wood, there's plastic, there's steel, concrete, there's pH, there's salinity, time. Contact time is how important, very important, especially when you're applying different dilutions of disinfectant. What temperatures? Are they freezing temperatures or are they Miami temperatures? Very different relations in regards to how you're going to treat that with disinfectant. UV light, what virus strain? As Dr. Ruman mentioned, the study that was done on the heat disinfection in those barns was not effective because maybe the virus surrogate that was used was not the same as the one that was actually present in HPAI in 2015. And the matrix, the makeup of any remaining organic material. Again, some places do have dry cleaning done. Some of them do the best that they can. Some of them just do the bare minimum. It kind of just depends. Some of them don't do any dry cleaning at all, and they go into a fallow period, like we've seen in California. So it just depends on what the situation is per premise, per incident, per site, and what the official rules and regulations are going to be for that specific procedure based on what the decision is made. A lot of these factors we really can't even control, so we have to be able to regard these and always kind of have that in the back of your head and see if that's going to affect your treatment process or not. Of course, when you're dealing with disinfectants, you're going to deal with the hazards and the concerns that come with it. As we know, we have to wear the appropriate PPE when you're dealing with any disinfectant or any chemical, and that's not just on an incident perspective, it's from a daily life perspective. You don't just play with chemicals and completely disregard what their concerns might be. So some of these may have to deal with poisonous gases. Some of them may be corrosive to your eyes and to your skin. Some of them might irritate your respiratory system, or they may be a carcinogen, and some may be toxic to your organs. But again, we need to be able to pay special attention to what PPE is required and if there's proper ventilation around where you're working so that you are not exposed to that in a higher concentration at any given time. Because of the human health concerns, we even see how some states ban certain products. So in California, we know that they are not very lenient with what products they release out into their public to use, or even for any kind of incident outbreak. Some of them are actually banned just in that state, even though they're EPA approved. And then not only that, taking it further, we have to be able to regard how it's going to affect your surfaces. So whether that's your tools, your structures, your equipment, and your transport vehicles, if these disinfectants aren't properly applied or rinsed afterwards, they might be able to corrode your tools, to have them disintegrate or decompose. They might oxidize. And if there's a residue that stays on any of these surfaces, they may actually cause that residue to build up, and then some of these disease agents may survive. And not only may they survive, they might actually become resistant to what the disinfectant components might be if they are not rinsed properly and they're not prepared or diluted correctly. That exposure is what causes resistance, or can cause resistance if it's not handled the right way. So here's just a picture of how, we would carefully handle chemicals or disinfectants. As we all know, we have to use personal protective equipment at all times, and that is a suggestion that extends into our daily lives at home or wherever. Even if it's just a Clorox wipe, make sure you wash your hands right after, because you don't know what's staying on your skin and what's going to be able to, kind of foster in that environment. As far as the chemical waste goes for the environment, we also have to consider that no matter where we are, for the most part, the rule is that the jurisdictions are going to most often start from the local level, and they're going to lead up to reference to EPA's federal rules. So it's going to start whether it's at the county or the city, district, and state, and then go on into the federal guidelines. Some states are not the same as others. So I know, for example, when I asked some of the people in my state, which is Florida, who is going to be the one deciding what to do with wastewater, some of them said, well, it's not going to be the Florida Department of Agriculture just yet. It has to be in joint efforts with the Office of Agricultural Water Policy, et cetera. So sometimes the county might be the one to get things running first. So we have to also consider, that we have to take note of all the areas that we're going to be affecting with this chemical wastewater. Some premises, if they're very large and commercial, or they span a lot, that's going to affect how they're treated in terms of chemicals and their chemical waste. If they're going to be close to any sorts of bodies of water, rivers or canals or lakes, or if it's near swamps. We have a lot of swamps down here in Florida, so that's one of the concerns that we have to think about if we're near that body of water. And it's also going to matter whether or not there's a specific type of topography. If it's an area that has a lot of hills or valleys or mountains, how is that going to seep into the substrate and the hydrology of that area? So for that, we do recommend, or we always, strive, and it may work sometimes and sometimes it may not, but we do strive to always be able to assess and consult with these governing agencies and kind of do that in the beginning or as early as possible to avoid any sort of dangerous circumstances or infractions or any kind of thwart to the health of the environment and to the humans that surround it. So, like we said, these practices are often consulted with the different agencies, and one example of that in Florida, we've got the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, plus the Office of Ag Water Policy. And then we've got the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, leading all the way up to the Environmental Protection Agency under federal rule. So here I've provided a map, and this map is just to kind of show you on how this area, this is the Alafia River watershed in Florida, northern Florida, and it just goes to show you if something were to happen in a site like this, you can see on the legend what the infiltration rates are because of the soil hydrologic groups that are present in this particular area. So if we had to do anything that regarded chemical waste here, we have to not only consult with the Florida Department of Ag, but we'd have to also join in with the water systems and water treatment, all the agencies that kind of have to deal with the treatment of this area because of how much it affects the hydrology that surrounds it. This is very much interconnected with all the water and the water systems that go on in this part of the state. And as most of us know, Florida's aquifers and their groundwater are really not that far from the topsoil, so we definitely have to take that into consideration. Not in the same fashion as a place maybe like with a much higher altitude would have to, because we don't have to worry about it seeping so deep into the groundwater that we don't have to worry about that right away. But Florida's concerns definitely have to include the watershed and the proximity to water and its topography in the beginning stages of a breakout. So we had mentioned the chemical disinfectants having to be approved by the EPA. So the EPA and the USDA both follow what we call FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and you can find it in 40 CFR Parts 150 to 189. It basically just denotes how disinfectants that we use have to be registered with the EPA, and for the most part, I think most of the products that we use are, but if they are not registered, they do have to be declared to the EPA as an emergency exemption, and that's a completely different process in which that's considered outside of normal standards, but it does have to be in consultation with the EPA if that does need to happen. So,
all right, thank you. Thank you, Karen. What I did after the webinar was not only we're going to welcome questions as well as comments and personal experiences, but I did ask Perry Burrows-Lemke. She is from the Minnesota Board of Animal Health as a district veterinarian. She joined in 2015, where she was involved with quite a bit of cleaning and disinfection, along with being a case manager there in Minnesota. So I asked her to give a few words on what her experiences were.
Thank you, and good morning. I was a case manager during the 2015 High Path AI event in Minnesota, and I was primarily responsible for performing pre-wet cleaning, pre-disinfection, and disinfection verification inspections, and some environmental sample collection. I inspected several turkey breeder barns and some grower barns. Today, I've been asked to review some of the challenges that were faced that I observed during the cleaning and disinfection processes. Minnesota summers can get hot, can be rainy, and very humid. By the time producers reached the wet cleaning and disinfection stage, we were well into our humid summer weather conditions. Most of the barns were in reasonable condition, but some were over 40 years old and in varying degrees of disrepair. Some of the barns had insulation falling out of the ceiling, torn curtains, taped together feed lines, and washed out clay floors. These barns sometimes needed extensive repairs prior to wet washing. Some barns had feed and water pans with a significant amount of rust, wear, and hard water and organic buildup. These older, damaged feed and water pans could not be cleaned effectively and ultimately were discarded. Smaller operations often contained workshops with expensive tools and parts that took many man-hours to dry, then wet clean and disinfect. Many of these producers gave up on this tedious project and subsequently discarded these items. Most of the farms I visited were very tidy, though some had collected years of trash and debris within the perimeter buffer area that needed to be disinfected prior to hauling away. It proved to be quite difficult and time-consuming to wet wash, dry, then wet disinfect and dry loads of water-permeable trash located outside of the barns. The turkey layer barns have rows of nesting boxes with egg conveyor systems. The nesting boxes themselves are comprised of several parts that needed to be taken apart in order to clean properly. The nesting boxes in the layer barns and the pen systems within the tom barns were difficult to navigate during the composting phase, and many of these structures were damaged during the composting process. Egg rooms in the layer barns were difficult to clean as the ventilation systems in place for egg sanitizing were taped together and thus could not withstand the wet cleaning and wet disinfection processes. Some barns had very fragile cooling cell systems that required inventive clean-in-place strategies to remove organic debris and disinfect. Some of the barns had concrete flooring, but many more had clay floors. Some of the barns had asphalt flooring. Barns with concrete flooring were the easiest to wet wash and disinfect and dried quickly. Those barns with clay floors that were in good repair were easy to get wet, but took many days to dry after wet cleaning and then again after wet disinfection. Barns with asphalt flooring could be washed, but the asphalt soaked up water like a sponge. The asphalt floors appeared to be dry, but would start to grow mold soon after wet washing and wet disinfection. The mold could only be killed with strong bleach solutions and manual scrubbing. Even after several days, the bleach fumes were quite strong in those closed-up facilities. As the months went on, with dwindling regulatory human resources, it became a challenge to schedule the visits in the proper order to inspect facilities as they were ready for each type of verification inspection. Producers faced humid and rainy and then cold weather conditions, and the availability of laborers to perform cleaning and disinfection tasks diminished, as they also worked to restock barns and move test-negative barns back into production. Performing proper biosecurity protocols and disinfecting our vehicles and equipment proved to be more challenging in October than it was in July. Once the barns met the fallow time requirement, we were relieved that there would be no more worries about freezing water and multiple trips to barns to ensure that each step of the cleaning and disinfection processes were verified. And thank you, Anna and Karen, for this opportunity to share my experiences today. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you, Perry.
Do you have any questions?
To submit a question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. Enter your question in the message box provided and send. Alternatively, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, then please state your name as well as your question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate you wish to ask a question. We have no questions.
We did have one comment that said, great information, thank you all. So I just wanted to pass that along to the speakers. Right now, we don't have any questions in the written queue. Oh, I do have a question. Someone is asking, where could we find the studies? And I think that refers what you were talking about, Karen.
Hi, yes. So if anybody wants to contact me, I've got most of the studies, and Dr. Ruman has a set too. If you can email either one or both of us, we'll be more than happy to provide you with the studies online.
Perfect. We do have another question. Does the National Vet Stockpile now stock recording thermometers that can be quickly sent and placed in structures being heat treated? I don't know if we know that answer.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
We want to know if the National Veterinary Stockpile stocks recording thermometers that can be quickly sent and placed in structures being heat treated.
I think that's a great question. When I was in Iowa for HPAI, they were using their own thermometers, and I'm not sure if that's a decision that came about later on in the incident because I was there towards the end as well. But that's a great question to move along and further up be able to get an answer from, because I think that would solve a little bit of a controversy in regards to having people or producers self-report their temperatures.
That's something we can bring up to the National Vet Stockpile people. We have another question. Can you provide the vendor that provides the undercarriage attachment for vehicle decon?
Okay, that was, I was just thinking, was it either, was it for the Bruce Acres development or the other undercarriage wash? Go ahead, Lori.
Well, I was just going to say, if it's for the other one, that was IS4S out of Huntsville, Alabama.
Okay, we'll wait to see if they write back. Here's another question. In your response experiences, was disinfection of vehicles required if they came on a premise, for example, to deliver feed, but did not cross a line of separation as defined in the secure beef supply planning?
This is Karen, and I can speak from my response experience. Any vehicle that would come into contact with any part of the prem, because we don't know where it goes outside of that premise, and if those are infected or compromised as well, we would require them to be disinfected.
Okay. similarly, for the equipment to perform the various C&D tasks, who would be the best to stockpile / have on hand the equipment and disinfectants?
If you look at the equipment, what we're trying to look at within the district is who has what. Just being able to know who has what is very important because some states are very innovative and have their own cadre of supplies. So the emergency coordinators working those areas, a lot of times they do have information of who has what. And of course, on some of the supplies, they do have end dates. They do have expiration dates. So watching those expiration dates is very important.
Okay. Arizona Department of Agriculture has a few questions. First of all, thanks for the great information. At the beginning of an outbreak, how do you decide how to get started? Does someone recon the farm and look at flow, et cetera, or decon the farm and look at flow, et cetera?
Well, myself as a site manager, when I first got onto farms, it may have been a little bit later, but usually the site manager works in conjunction with the operations section and starts making decisions of the best way to position everything on a farm.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The Arizona Department of Ag would like to ask questions via the phone. So they just need to push #2 on their keypad?
Yes.
And they will be put in the verbal queue.
We do have a hand raised. Are you prepared for that question?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Folks, good morning. This is Dwayne Eulig, the Emergency Preparedness Planner for the Arizona Department of Agriculture. I just had 3 short questions, and if I may, real quick, given our rural and austere environments here, more notably in southern Arizona, with regards to heating of decon products, i.e. water, was there any equipment that was found to be more beneficial to others, more specifically what worked and what did not work? Question number 2. With regards to wastewater and more specifically biodegradable products that are used, did anyone bring up the possibility of using gray water pits, especially out in rural and austere environments? And then lastly, with regards to human health concerns, environments, we did not see on the slide temperatures versus human decontamination processes. Were the folks protected with proper PPE? Was that determined not to be listed on the slide because of that, or were there other mitigating factors? Those are our 3 questions.
Okay, as far as the heating the water, what being the most efficient way, I know Bruce Akers had done the work with that mobile unit on some of the water heaters, and he may have information on that, and I can certainly provide you with that contact information. This is Anna Ruman, so I can connect you with Bruce Akers on that point. Lori, are you aware of use of any gray water pits or for wastewater?
So 2 comments. One comment relative to the heating. I also want to mention that the National Veterinary Stockpile does use heat blankets for heating drums of like foam concentrate, and so those blankets could also be used for disinfectant concentrate. But in Arizona, just a clarification, are you asking more about are there adverse effects from using those disinfectants in hot weather?
No, ma'am, not at all. Just from reports coming in from the field, we have different agencies this morning, you know, geographically speaking from all around. I was just kind of curious if anyone had dealt with the questions that I had raised given different rural or different austere environments.
Thank you. And then to the second part regarding the gray water. So that's going to depend on your local/state jurisdiction, so your environmental agencies responsible for surface water and groundwater protection. They would be the ones who would advise you on, you know, if you're permitted to do that. And so, you know, in a very arid environment, a lot of times evaporation is a reasonable approach to disposing of wastewater. And so, you know, that may be the case. It would depend on the soil conditions at the site where that's going to be done, and the humidity and so forth. So that's something that would be decided on the local or state level.
Thank you.
Hello there. I just want to speak to the slide regarding the human health concern. I do apologize for not having that on there, but I can speak from the perspective of pretty much every incident outbreak I've assisted on. Temperature is, of course, a consideration in regards to human decon resources, but we do normally try to have safety officers on site that will always, they are the prime resource for informing the responders and the resources. If there are dangerous temperatures involved, and we've seen that in Iowa and HPAI in the middle of summer, it does get quite hot. We have a more fervent rotational schedule for when we have cleaning and disinfection or decontamination resources. We have messages that we have hydration stations. We have more opportunities in which if someone feels like they are being threatened by that condition, they need to speak up and they need to be able to either be replaced or they can easily pull themselves out of a dangerous situation. Our safety responders' priorities will always be their health. So we do emphasize that whenever we have an incident outbreak.
Outstanding, folks. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have one more question in the chat box. Is environmental sampling conducted after the end of fallowing in case it was the only method of decontamination used?
That has been our normal protocol, I believe, in the case of VMD in California. Karen?
As far as I've seen, yes, we've always completed after their fallow period, and only after they've received a freedom sample are they actually considered free.
Okay.
We do have an additional question on the phone.
Okay.
Lori, you can provide some insight into this. This is Jimmy Tickle. Remember, as we were starting to try to understand how to best use composting for disposal as an option, that USDA provided training and worked with composting experts, SMEs, that then over the course of time have expanded to include a number of different states. Having these same experts as the program has grown. In this sense, Decon is quite the technical task. It also has variables with regard to states, geographies, regulatory pieces to it, as well as best practices. Is there an effort from USDA? You mentioned Bruce Akers. I've worked with him in North Carolina. He's the de facto. He has a Chem Rad background out of the military. And that's how he came to develop those. He's got 15 mobile trailers, 5 big ones, 10 smaller ones to use for high-path AI or whatever. But I could foresee that each state would really need an SME that then could collaborate, talk about best practices as a working group nationally to help further what's going on with Decon, but also to address logistics, capacity, and even capabilities for their particular states as well. Is there an effort to try to expand Decon SMEs as technical specialists for events and even for planning purposes?
Hi, Jimmy. This is Lori Miller. Good to hear your voice. So there's a couple of different things going on. One is the Farm Bill. And so the 2019 funding has recently been awarded, and that was for training and exercising. And there were quite a few proposals related to biosecurity and cleaning and disinfection. And so those were focused within states to help build their own in-state capabilities, in essence, creating those experts. I'm not aware of any federal effort to create, a cadre of decon specialists. It's a great idea, and, we can certainly think about it. There is also the 2020 Farm Bill funding opportunity announcement that will be coming out in the near future, and, that's certainly an opportunity for folks to propose things like that. So it will depend on what the priorities are going to be for 2020. I don't know what they will be at this point. That's being decided at, the top levels. And then once that's decided, the opportunity will be announced. So keep your eyes out for that also.
Okay. At the present time, we have no more questions in the chat. Do we have anything left in the queue, for the verbal queue?
We have no further questions on the phone.
All right. So we've reached the top of the hour. I would like to also thank everyone for joining us today. We have 2 other webinars coming up tomorrow. One tomorrow is Rubber Meets the Road webinar on passive trapping and surveillance of New World screwworm. And on Thursday, we'll be hosting Preparing to Implement the Secure Beef Supply Plan webinar. So watch your emails. There'll be announcements going out again today and tomorrow regarding those webinars. So with that, I bid you a farewell and a great afternoon.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.